2019, I and some of my family went to Cuba. It was a research trip to find out more about the instrument called the botija, or batijuela, which played a crucial part in the development of Afro-Cuban music. I enlisted my dad, my stepmom, and my brother to help in my quest. The botija is a type of terracotta pot that the Spanish used to import olive oil and wine to Cuba after colonization. It has an opening at the top and also a hole in the side. According to the Cuban scholar Fernando Ortiz, the first written record of the use of the botija as an instrument was in the 1870s in Santiago, Cuba. The pots that botija players play are typically several hundred years old, because currently pots of this type are not being made. Before I started my research, we wandered around Old Havana and found music everywhere, on the streets, in the cafes, public squares, and plazas. We found this cheerful band on the Malecón the first day we arrived, playing for tips from tourists. Teenagers danced to mixtapes on the Prado, and on a quiet Sunday morning, we found a trumpet teacher and his student going through their lessons in the park. In a big plaza in the old city, we found capoeira musicians and dancers who brought traditional Afro-Brazilian culture into the mix, singing and playing berimbaus, musical bows with gourd resonators. Every time I met a musician, I asked them if they knew anyone who played the botija. An elderly street singer by the name of Roberto Limonta Corrales directed us to Obispo Street, and other musicians suggested specific clubs. On Obispo Street, we found a different band in every club, restaurant, and park, sometimes several in a block. In one cafe, we found the Septeto Típico de Sones and some stylish dancers. In planning my trip, with the help of Dr. Robin Moore, an ethnomusicology professor from UT Austin, I was able to make contact with the legendary 91-year-old botija player Francisco Bacallao. His granddaughter, Liane Gonzalez Bacallao, arranged a visit with Francisco at his home, and we spent an afternoon talking about Cuban music.
Usaron los septetos en Cuba por los años 1920. Esta botija.
Francisco demonstrated the botija and showed us some posters and photos from his active days as a musician. He also showed us photos of his father, Antonio Bacallao, the first musician to make a recording on the botija in the 1920s, and the bands that Antonio had played in the early years of the last century. Antonio taught the instrument to his son, and for a time they played in a band together, with Antonio on botija and Francisco on marimbula. Here's Francisco playing botija. Like the botija, the marimbula has its roots in Africa. It looks like a big kalimba or thumb harp, a type of instrument which is found all over Africa and other parts of the world, and it plays in the bass range. Like the botija, it is rarely used anymore, having been replaced by the upright or electric bass. We had a great time hearing Francisco's stories about his musical life and his botija playing, and we enjoyed meeting his granddaughter Liane, his wife Agueda Gomez Campos, and several other family members. We left with hopes that we'd be able to keep in touch even after returning to the U.S. The band we ran into when we saw the dancers turned out to be the same band Francisco had played in before he retired, Septeto Típico de Sones. And one of the current band members was also a botija player, though he told us the botija is not used very much in Cuban music anymore. He agreed to bring out the botilla and play it, and the bass player also brought out his marimbula, which is still used a bit more than the botilla. When the band took a break, we chatted with Ismael Toca Quiñones, the botilla player. I was eager to ask him about the sound production technique. It seemed clear to me as I watched him play that he was using an embouchure technique similar to that of the trumpet, horn, or trombone, but I had found in my reading that there is some confusion about the classification of the Cuban botilla. In some sources, it is classified as a flute, in others as a horn.
Y entonces, ¿qué pasa? Que a algún músico se le ocurrió, al no haber encontrado, se le ocurrió, le abre este hoyo aquí para la embocadura. Es algo parecido a la trompeta, al trombón. Sí. Y por aquí sale el sonido.
He described the embouchure and playing technique as being similar to that of a trumpet or trombone with a lip-vibrated embouchure.
Un contrapunto con la marimba, por ejemplo. Vienen siendo los picados ustedes.
Guantanamera, Guajira, Guantanamera.
We found a lot of other musicians on the streets of Havana Vieja, including this wandering singer with a handmade kazoo. The kazoo also derives from African traditions. Many African cultures have a deep understanding of resonance and distortion that can be seen in the many things that are added to African instruments because they buzz or rattle when vibrated, from spider's egg membranes to bottle caps. In this case, the player had made his own kazoo by screwing a coin loosely to the top of the tube.
Guantanamera, Guajira, Guantanamera, Guantanamera, Guajira, Guantanamera.
At the end of my first week in Cuba, my family had to return home, and I got on a bus to Santiago in the eastern part of Cuba, reputed to be the place where many Cuban musical styles originated. When I reached Santiago, I found it to be full of musicians who play in the various parks and clubs. The musicians' culture in Santiago revolves around the Casa de la Trova and the Casa de Cultura. I tried the same tactic I had used in Havana, asking every musician I met if they knew anyone who played the botija. They all mentioned that there was one musician who had his own band called La Botija, but he was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, I wandered the streets of Santiago and heard many great bands and musicians playing trova, son, and rumba. I also heard Cuban estudiantina for the first time. In Mexico, I had encountered estudiantina groups, but there it refers to something more akin to madrigal singers. In Santiago, estudiantina is a style of music that uses two singers, a tres, a guitar, and small Cuban timpani called paila, and also sometimes marimbula. I also got to see Tumba Francesca dancers and their giant drums, a tradition that arrived from Haiti, and got to see a visiting band from Brittany feature another traditional Cuban instrument, a small shawm called the corneta china. I asked them all about the botija player. I got a tip that he played at a place some distance from downtown called Casa Caribe, and visited there, but they told me no, he won't be here till Friday. That gave me several days to enjoy the music scene of downtown Santiago while I waited for a chance to meet him. On Friday, as I walked around Santiago visiting my favorite street bands, One of the band members gave me word that the botija player would not be playing Friday after all, but offered to take me to his house, which is how I finally met Ángel Ruiz.
Muchos notas tocan una o dos
Sí,
notas,
no,
pero puedes tocar más.
Exacto, aquí sí, no, aquí yo he estudiado mucho y por eso que yo le saco más notas.
Ajá. Muy bueno. Gracias. Muchas gracias. ¿Y puedes decir tu nombre?
Mi nombre es Ángel Ruiz, botijuelista, trombonista.
Ángel plays trombone as well as botija, but has dedicated himself to preserving and expanding the tradition of botija playing, which is why he started his band, La Botija. In addition to playing early Cuban folk forms like changui, the first style the botija was associated with, he is pushing the botija into new styles, including samba and even Latin techno-pop. I was thrilled with all of the new musical forms and instruments I had encountered on my trip, and ready to return home. But on my last day, Santiago still had one surprise left. My friend Reggie Robotham, a musician living in Mexico, had mentioned that he had family members in Santiago who played the street organ. I had given up on seeing one of these, but on my last day I came around a corner and there it was, a wooden organ with wooden pipes, its bellows run by an electric belt, played with piles of punch cards like player piano rolls, and accompanied by Cuban percussion. For a musical visitor, Cuba is like the Galapagos Islands of music, a place where you can experience rare musical forms and instruments, and see in the everyday music the evolutionary development of African instruments and musical styles brought over to the New World with African slaves. Because of its relative economic and political isolation, Cuba's musical traditions have evolved and developed in unique ways. Government promotion and support of folkloric music and musicians has also nurtured Cuba's folk music traditions, allowing these traditions to persevere and thrive.